Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to Wood by Wright 2. Today we're going to be making this coin puzzle. I'm going to be going into a much more detail and talking through why I did what I was doing and how I did so you can get a little bit more ideas on that. If you do want to just see the quick overview video and do it without me talking, you can see that on the main channel. I'll leave a link to that down below. So today we're going to be making this. It is made out of basswood for the inside and the outside panels are made of oak. Just whatever I had on hand, except for the basswood I went and purchased from the store. I'll leave links to that down below if you want to see that. It's designed for nickel, but you could also fit a penny or a dime in here. I made it so a quarter won't quite fit. But we're going to have a little bit of fun with this. I have seen a few other styles of this, and I'll try and leave a couple links to those videos where the coin is flat rather than rolling on edge. And they have different ways of doing that, and I might do one of those in the future as well. But for right now, let's dive into working on this beast. Now it's time to start working on this thing. I'm actually going to be making the top and bottom of it out of oak, red oak to be particular. I had some scraps on hand that are about 1/4 inch thick. And then everything inside will be made of basswood. To make this, I want to make the top and bottom plates of it as close as similar as possible. So I'm actually going to cut one of them and then use that to trace the size and cut the other one exactly to match the first one. Once those have been cut out, then we can start working on the inside traces. These are made of basswood. I have 1/8 inch thick basswood. This is stuff that I purchased at the local home store, but you can buy it online as well. I'll leave a link to it down below if you'd like to find that. This is thin enough that you can make the maze big, but it's still thick enough that it actually supports rather well inside. Cutting it was a little bit more tedious than I expected, but if you support it along the edge of the bench, it actually cuts fairly well. Once we cut them down, I actually want to trim them down to the final finished size that I put on with a marking gauge. And I was surprised to see even this thin, they actually plane rather well. Once I have those down, we can start getting into the gluing. I'm going to be using 2P10. Mostly I'm going to be using the thin glue, but in some cases I'll be using the thick and then the activator. I'll leave a link to the glue down below as well. I want to start by creating a trace for the coin to fall into. I'm going to use a dovetail saw to cut all these pieces to length and then glue them all in. I do not have plans for this. I'm just going by eye, and I'll talk about that a little more in the future. The other thing I also need are these stretcher sticks. These separate each of the layers so that each layer is always the same thickness all the way down. They are sticks of basswood that are 1/8 inch by 1/8 inch. And cutting them to length was a little more difficult than I expected, trying to get them all to precisely the same length. I did a fairly decent job, but ended up having to cut a lot more off in the future. And we'll be getting that later. So everything is just glued on, add a little bit of super glue, spray it, and let it go. And it's in place. And we'll be doing this over and over and over again throughout the entire process. It took about 2 hours or so to actually make the whole slide process. One by one, we can cut them and glue them in. And also, if you want to watch these live, I do put them up for all of my members here on YouTube, so you can check that out down below. Now we're going to keep going at this piece at a time, trying to make sure that all the layers match up and slicing all these little pieces. Some of them you can see on the side will be actually layers of the spacer rod and then a small piece of the thickness. I want to keep that in there so when you look at it from the end, you always see spacer rod thickness, spacer rod thickness, spacer rod thickness, so that you can't tell where all of the problems are in the maze. And I don't really have a plan for this maze. I'm just kind of winging it by eye, creating some places that are dead-end stops and some places that are harder to get through, and having a little bit of fun as I go, and trying not to be too vindictive and mean with how hard it is to get through. But it ended up being a lot simpler than I expected. The only downsides were trying not to glue my finger to the board. Every now and then some of the super glue would build up. I just have to scrape it off to make sure there wasn't any problem with gluing the next layer in place. Just one by one, keep on going, and that's about it. It really isn't that much more to say about this other than try and make sure that all the pieces are smooth so that the coin as it falls through from one side to the other doesn't catch on anything. I found that to be a little more difficult, and I had to clean that up later. Then on the last piece, we can set it up and actually test this thing and try it before putting the lid on it. And that was Kind of surprising, it ended up being far more difficult than I was anticipating, even with being able to see the coin. But then once we put the lid on it, it became really difficult because you can't see the coin. You just know that it's in the box somewhere, shaking and rattling around. Here you can see a good shot of how the glue goes on. Spray it, let it sit for a second, and it's solid, ready to go. I just want to trim up a few things, clean up all the edges, and make sure that everything is nice and pretty, and it's ready to go and put the lid on. Here's the fun of playing it without the lid. Far more difficult than I had expected, but yeah, it's doable. And a lot of fun too. Next thing we want to do is actually go through this whole maze and just see if there's any place that the coins might catch on one thing or another. And I'm going to trim them up with a chisel and a knife to make sure that the coin actually slides through it nicely. Now before I put the lid on, I actually want to smooth it out so that the lid has a nice fit to it. As some of these were slightly longer or wider than each other, it just was a little bit more difficult. And here you can see, oop, I broke a piece off right there. Oh well. Just took a little more time, and I found it actually easier to use a chisel than using the plane, and taking my time with each individual piece, sliding along them and trimming them all up to the right length. The long grain was not difficult at all to plane down, but it's all the end grain from the spacer sticks sticking up that were a little bit more tricky than I had planned on. So I can just go through, shave them all down, and then make sure with the top when it fits on that it's nice and clean and there aren't any gaps from it. One last little playthrough before we seal it up, and I hope everything works out well. I'm going to be using the super gel, I think it is, it's either thick or gel, and I'm just putting little dabs of it here and there on each of the pieces so that they hold in place, and then all the way along the outside. Then we can put the top on and clamp it in place. I'm just going to use squeeze clamps. You don't need a whole lot of pressure with it, you just need enough to hold it down, and so a series of squeeze clamps actually do a really good job. I like having a bunch of these on hand because I use them more than I anticipate. Once that is done, then we can start smoothing this whole thing down. And there are a lot of rough spots where the glue stuck out here and there. And actually, just before smoothing it, one thing I didn't get on video is I put a little bit more CA glue into some of the joints, anything that was sticking up or anything that was a gap, and let it harden in there with a little bit more glue. Then we can come into the plane and smooth off all the sides. The front and back with the long grain were fairly easy. The long grain, the end grain on the two ends, it was a little bit more difficult, so I put a block on the back to support the grain and then planed it down. If I thought about it, I probably would have used a shooting board, but oh well, when you think about that afterwards. I thought about it right about here. Like, oh, maybe I should have done that. I was actually really happy with how the ends of these came out. It looked kind of like a weird plywood shape, and kind of surprisingly good. So the next thing I want to do is chamfer it all, smooth it down, and it's ready for oil basically. There isn't that much more to do with it. Make sure that everything is the way you want it, and away we go. I just coated some boiled linseed oil and paste wax to seal it all in. I didn't put any finish on the inside. You're never going to see it, so really not a problem. I just coated everything on the outside, let it soak in, let it cure for a little bit, wiped off the excess, and then added the paste wax to it. And then we can experiment with this thing. And it took me probably 6 or 7 minutes with even knowing how it was built and running into problems here and there until I could finally get it out the other side. Yeah, a little more difficult than I expected, but a lot of fun.
There.
And look, there's a coin out the other side.
Yeah, got it.
So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this one. I really had a ton of fun, and this came out better than I was expecting, actually. I'm really, really happy with this, and I might do some more like this in the future. So if you'd like to see that, let me know in the comments below, and we might do that. So I think that's about it for today. Until next time, have a wonderful day. Ooh, that's amazing.